Terra's Story, Chapter 27. Too early again, Joni whispered, checking her watch. We have just enough time to get to Terra's drop point for a quick check before we have to get back to ours. Is there any point? We don't know until we try, do we? Brian whispered back. But we're getting closer to the time, so something has to happen soon. Joni, do you want to wait here while we shift and fly over to the other side of the purification ponds? She thought a moment, not sure whether she wanted to be alone just yet. 1:24. Yes, that might be better, so we make sure I get my payload to the lake by 1:48. Brian and Terra stepped outside the car and shifted as soon as the doors were closed. They flew over the ponds within minutes and circled the drop point. It, too, looked deserted, a strip of weed-covered terrain that bordered the end of the pond near the embankment that contained the water. Their sonar picked up a hunting owl flying low through the trees of an adjacent clump of forest. Brian veered off in that direction, something pulling him. Terra swooped after him, her sonar finding the owl moving, and then something else, something slower and lower. She squeaked as she tried to telepath to Brian, whose flight had carried him into the shadows of the trees. Undecided, she flitted toward whatever was moving slower and lower through the trees and circled down, frustrated by her inability to see. Finally, she lit on a low branch at the edge of the woods where she could see the drop point and carefully shifted back into human form, glad for the tree trunk to grab onto. Even with her normal eyes, she could hardly make out more than two figures carrying something bulky between them, but at least she could ascertain that they were heading to the drop point. Well, they may be here, but I don't have the ransom, so I'd better get back to the car. Carefully, Terra shifted back into bat form and flew back to the car. Brian was waiting for her there, stroking Joni's hand that clutched his. They're here, but it didn't do me any good. I couldn't see anything significant with either bat or human eyes, Terra complained. But this is my drop point, so I'm going to take the ransom money and go back. Joni, drive Brian to the overlook, then get back to the lake to your drop point. We can't afford to screw this up. She checked the clock on Mitzi's dashboard. 1:31. You've got just enough time to get there going slow and quiet. Now, hand me, she grunted as Joni tossed her the black backpack. Now, after the drop, I'm going to hang around in bat form to follow the copter. I'll rest in a nearby tree so my wings don't get too tired. I'll try to telepath, but just in case I can't do it effectively, I'll get back to my apartment as quickly as possible. You both do that too, okay? They nodded as Terra shouldered the backpack and turned toward the drop point. I suspect they'll be watching for someone to show up with the ransom, so I'm not trying to be quiet or invisible until after I've attached the payload to the copter. Then I'll leave just as noisily and get out of sight before I switch again. She paused, waiting for their confirmation. Right, me too, Joni replied. Brian nodded his assent also. Yeah, sounds like the best way to me, Terra. Good luck, and be careful. You too, both of you. Be careful. And she turned and started slowly toward the strip of weeds where the shadows had been headed. She heard Mitzi start up and the slight swish of tires as she rolled over the weeds, a thump as she ran over the curb, and then a stronger hum as the engine accelerated slightly on the road. Then silence. Terra felt the space around her, empty of humankind, but for what she knew lay at the drop point. She checked her watch. 1:40. Still too early. She really didn't want to run into anybody with $1 million in cash hanging on her back. She heard a rustle, as though something or someone was moving through the weeds. Terra ducked down beside the rise of the embankment, squatting as low as she could go in the weeds. She held her breath as two figures passed within a few feet, noting the rank smell of body odor and a whiff of cigarette smoke. They passed quickly, and silence fell again. She straightened slowly, still looking, still listening. In the distance, she heard the latch of a car door. Of course. They won't come back because the copters will deliver the payload somewhere else. Once that thought settled, Terra relaxed a bit. She felt a bit frustrated, having been so close to two of the criminals. But Cap had been clear. The goal tonight was to deliver the ransom, get the power restored to the city, assuming the perps followed through on their promise, and if possible, get some information about where the money ended up and who came to claim it. Less hesitant now, she switched on her headlamp and walked through the weeds, not even trying to be quiet, and there it was. Someone had cleared a space in the weeds near the end of the embankment. In the middle of the cleared patch sat what looked like an oversized toy, lights blinking, one red, one white, just like a real aircraft. Clearly it was activated, which means someone was watching. She looked around, sensing something sinister, and decided to duck down and crawl beneath the rotors. The blades of the copter stretched a little wider than her arms if she held them out straight. So, just like a full-sized copter, they would do some serious damage if she came too close while they were whirling. She could hear a soft hum, which meant the engine was running. Pulling herself forward on her belly with elbows and toes, Terra could duck low enough that the blades would miss her if they started up. Sweating now, in spite of the chill of the evening, she rummaged for the zipper of the backpack and reached inside for the bag of cash. She aimed her headlight at it to find the carabiner, then flashed back to the copter vibrating in front of her. There it is. She found the matching carabiner and hooked the parachute to it. The folds of the chute part of the bag fell lightly into place. She dropped her head to her hands, wiped the sweat from her brow, and checked her watch again, 1:45. Still on her belly, Terra began to reverse her way out from under the blades. Once clear, she stood and backed away a few more feet, then turned and walked back the way she'd come. By the time she reached the edge of the strip of weeds, she heard the engine of the little copter start to scream, and the whap, whap, whap of the blades as the rotors accelerated. She ran for the clump of trees, threw the backpack into the crotch of 3 high branches nearby, and turned to watch even as she started to shift her consciousness into bat mode. The craft lifted off in jerks, as though the operator was not sure of the controls. To her bat ears, the noise of the copter sounded like a freight train, impossible not to hear, even while she kept a safe distance. She followed it through the night, the scents teasing her nose and the gusts of wind the only indicators of her travel. They passed through an industrial section on the outskirts of town, through a large subdivision with small parks scattered about, then into the heart of the city, judging from the height of the buildings and their closeness. Terra gained altitude and then dove to give her wings some rest while the copter clattered its noisy way onward. She had used this technique only a few times when she realized the machine was dropping down toward the roof of a medium-sized building, and circled down, too. It landed, and several shadowy figures ran out toward it, waiting until the blades stopped rotating before rushing in to grab the copter and its payload. Locating a tall shadow near one corner of the wall around the roof, Terra settled down as close as she could to it and shifted back into human form, hoping to see better. Yes, 2 men. Are those fatigues? Gray and black? Damn, it's hard to see without lights. They had carried the miniature copter off to the side and somehow disconnected its blades, but where's the payload? Damn, I didn't see it drop. Terra wilted. She had successfully followed the copter to its lair, but the $1 million payload had vanished somewhere en route.